When we think about punishment today, we tend to think about justice. But back then, oh, it was a whole different ballgame. It wasn't just about justice, it was a performance. A full-blown public show designed to entertain, to terrify, and to send a crystal clear message. And let me tell you, people got wildly and horrifyingly creative with it. So yeah, if you think things are bad now, just imagine a time where stealing a simple pair of shoes could get you, well, you saw the quote. But the craziest part, to them, this wasn't seen as extreme. This was just the law. It was carried out in front of huge, cheering crowds, almost like it was the main event. So, let's dive in, shall we? Okay, so to try and wrap our heads around all this madness, we're going to rank these methods. We'll put them in tiers, starting at tier D, which is, entry-level brutal, if you can believe that. And we're going to climb all the way up to the absolute most unthinkable stuff in tier S. Ready? Let's get started. All right, kicking things off in tier D. And look, these are absolutely horrifying by any standard we have today, but believe me when I say this is just the warm-up act. First up, let's talk about the iron boot, coming to us from Renaissance Europe. Its job was brutally simple. Squeeze a confession out of you, no matter what it did to your body. And what was the crime, you ask? A lot of the time, it was just for not confessing fast enough to something you probably didn't even do in the first place. So how did this thing actually work? It's pretty grim. They'd force your leg into this super tight casing, either metal or wood. Then they'd just hammer these wedges into the gap, slowly squeezing your flesh and just shattering the bone. And if that wasn't quite enough for them, some models had an upgrade. They'd stuff red-hot coals inside. So you're being crushed and literally cooked at the same time. Just awful. Okay, so the boot was a tool to get information. But some punishments weren't about that at all. They were for crimes so terrible, so symbolic, that the response had to be just as symbolic. Take ancient Rome. Killing your own parent, that was pretty much the worst thing you could possibly do. So the punishment had to fit the crime. They called it pena culae, the punishment of the sack. And this is where things get truly bizarre. The condemned person was sewn into this big leather bag, but they weren't alone. Nope. They were joined by a dog, a snake, a monkey, and a rooster. Yep, you heard me right. Each animal was supposed to represent chaos. Once everybody was in, they sealed it up and tossed the whole thing into a river. I mean, can you imagine? You're not just drowning, you're being attacked by 4 frantic animals in the pitch black. Unbelievable. Okay, we're moving up the ladder. Welcome to tier C. This is where the cruelty gets way more calculated. It's more methodical, and it's all about prolonging the suffering. The goal isn't just pain anymore. It's about a slow, deliberate, drawn-out destruction of a person. Let's head to 17th century France. For them, certain crimes weren't just crimes against people. They were crimes against God, against the universe itself, like tearing the very fabric of society. And for that, they had the breaking wheel. And trust me, this was not a quick way to go. It was a step-by-step, meticulous dismantling of a human being. The whole process was, well, it was a show, a public deconstruction. They'd tie the victim to this huge wooden wheel with their arms and legs spread out. Then the executioner, with a heavy iron club, would just go to town, shattering their limbs one by one. But here's the key. They were careful to keep the person alive just long enough to weave their now broken body through the spokes of the wheel. It's like some kind of grotesque human pretzel. And then they'd hoist the wheel up high for the whole crowd to see. And you know that same kind of calculated, slow cruelty? It found its absolute peak in Tang Dynasty China, with a punishment called lingxi. You've probably heard of it, death by 1,000 cuts. This was saved for the worst of the worst, like high treason, and it was all about maximizing public shame. The executioner would make hundreds of tiny little cuts, being super careful not to hit any major arteries, all to keep the victim alive and in agony for as long as humanly possible. All right, brace yourselves. We're now entering Tier B, and this is where things take a turn. The horror here isn't just physical anymore. It becomes mental. These punishments weren't just about destroying the body. They were designed to absolutely shatter the mind first. Take the oubliettes from medieval France. The name itself is a clue. It comes from the French word oublier, which means to forget. And that was exactly the point. You weren't really executed. You were just dropped into a deep, dark pit and completely forgotten, left to the darkness. So this really shows the two sides of Tier B horror, right?
On one hand, you've got the oubliette, that's the passive psychological stuff, just being left alone in the dark to starve or literally go insane. But then, on the other hand, you have the complete opposite, this brutally active punishment of being sawn in half, which was used in early Islamic Persia. And they even had a technique for it. They'd hang the victims upside down. Why? To keep the blood flowing to the brain, making absolutely sure they stayed conscious for as much of the process as possible.
Okay, Tier A. We're getting into the really big leagues of brutality now. These punishments, they weren't just about pain or even death. No, these were grand, theatrical productions. They were a show of force by the state, and they were designed to be as disgusting and unforgettable as they could possibly make them. Case in point, 1500s England. If you committed high treason, betrayed the king or queen, your insides literally became public entertainment. The official punishment was being hanged, drawn, and quartered. And let me tell you, that phrase does not even come close to covering the pure horror of what actually happened. Think about it like a gruesome four-act play. Act 1, you're drawn, which means you get dragged by a horse through the dirty streets. Act 2, you're hanged, but they cut you down while you're still alive and gasping for air. Act 3 is the main event. You're disemboweled, your abdomen is sliced open, and you're forced to watch your own guts get burned in a fire. And for the grand finale, you're beheaded, and your body is chopped into 4 pieces, which are then put on display around the city. A lovely little warning for everyone else. So, if being hanged, drawn, and quartered was raw political theater, our next one, from ancient Greece, well, this one takes cruelty and turns it into a twisted form of art. Everyone meet the brazen bull. It's part execution device, part torture chamber, and believe it or not, part musical instrument. So, the whole thing was this giant, hollow statue of a bull made of bronze. They'd lock a victim inside, light a fire underneath, and just roast them alive. But here's the most diabolical part. It had this special acoustic system inside, a whole network of tubes that would take the person's screams and transform them into the sound of a bellowing, angry bull. And in what has to be one of the greatest twists of karmic justice in all of history, the tyrant who commissioned it, Phalaris, decided to test it out on its inventor, Perilos. He was the very first victim. And now we're here, Tier S, the top of the mountain, the absolute pinnacle of human cruelty. The methods we're about to talk about are so vile, so ingeniously evil, it is genuinely hard to believe a human mind even came up with them. Our final entry comes from ancient Persia. It's a method called scaphism, but it's better known as the boats. And it is, without any competition, one of the most prolonged and disgusting ways to die ever invented. The whole idea was to let nature do the dirty work for you, in the most horrifying way imaginable. Okay, so the process is pure nightmare fuel. You've got a victim, right? They're trapped between 2 small boats or maybe a hollowed-out log with just their head and limbs sticking out. Then they are forced to vet a mix of milk and honey. This gives them terrible, terrible diarrhea, which, well, it just collects inside this wooden tomb they're in. At the same time, they're covered in more honey to attract every insect in the area. Then they're just left in a stagnant swamp to be slowly eaten alive from the outside by bugs while they literally rot from the inside. And they would come back every single day to feed the person again for the sole reason of making it all last longer. There's one historical account that claims a victim survived this for 17 days. 17 days. Just think about that. 17 days of being eaten alive, rotting, and stewing in your own filth. Just let that number sink in for a second. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Humans are so creative. We're masters of invention. But that's not always a good thing. All of these punishments show a side of human creativity that is just profoundly disturbing. It's a chilling reminder that the same ingenuity that lets us build cathedrals and fly to the moon can also be used for this, for unimaginable evil. So the question I guess we're left with is, what does this dark side of our creativity really say about who we are?